My name is Susan Olson.
And I'm Walter Burns.
Today marks the end of our 37th president's time in the White House, as Richard Nixon signs his resignation papers, handing the presidency over to Gerald Ford.
This also marks the first time an American president has resigned from office before the end of their term.
And because of the uniqueness of this situation, we have Charlie Cabrera over at Watergate to remind us of all the actions committed by Nixon that led to his resignation. Charlie?
Today, Nixon resigned the presidential office in response to the ongoing controversy and troubles regarding the Watergate scandal. As Nixon stated in a speech this morning, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. This comes merely days after the House Judiciary Committee approved articles of impeachment against the president with charges of obstruction of justice. This charge refers to the cover-up actions that the Nixon administration took following a break-in at the DNC headquarters of the Watergate office complex in Washington. Looking back on the past 5 years of Nixon's presidency, there have been many successes, failures, and criticisms aside from Watergate. The Duke graduate turned politician served in the Senate, House of Representatives, and Vice President's office before being elected president in 1968, following his defeats in the 1960 presidential and 1962 gubernatorial elections. Re-elected with an overwhelming majority, Nixon campaigned on promises to bring America together again and find a way to peace with honor in Vietnam. In contrast to President Johnson's policy of escalation in Vietnam, through actions such as the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and taking the offensive, Nixon did bring about an end to the war with the Paris Peace Accords signed just over a year ago. The promise of peace with honor, though, has faced extensive criticism, especially following the publication of the Pentagon Papers in 1971. Back to you, Susan.
Following the resignation of Nixon, we, the staff of CBT News, have decided to cover some of the important social, political, and economic changes before and during his presidency. Some major players in Nixon's game is the end of American involvement in the Vietnam War, the success of SALT I and trip to Moscow to further discussion of limitations to weapons such as ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons during the arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States, President Nixon's unprecedented week-long trip to communist China to meet with Mao Zedong and end years of isolation, and the success of Apollo 11. But some people may disagree with some of these so-called successes. Here to discuss controversy surrounding Apollo 11 is Walter Burns.
Apollo 11 launched from Cape Kennedy on July 16, 1969, carrying Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Module Pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and which was a huge morale boost for Americans due to the Russians launching the first satellite in 1957. First off, everyone's just going to believe this happened. I mean, if anyone is dirty enough to fake it, it's Nixon. I mean, all you have to do is put 3 grown men in puffy suits, like it's Halloween, and get a green screen. Anybody can land on the moon. I'm no conspiracy theorist, but come on, people. Stop acting like it for sure 100% happened.
Similarly to Apollo 11, many major changes during Nixon's presidency were not considered successes. Some were viewed as failures, Watergate, of course, being one of them. Then the release of the Pentagon Papers revealing the U.S.'s gruesome actions in the Vietnam War, and Nixon's controversial actions of Vietnamization, plus all the other problems on top of that. However, not all of them were a result of his time in the White House, such as the reveal of what actually happened at the Gulf of Tonkin, which will be further discussed later. The Vietnam War brought about a whole new wave of social change, and a lot of Nixon's actions fed into this social change. But before we get to some of the social change due to the 20-year war, here's Walter Burns again with special guest Betty Friedan, here to discuss her book and second wave feminism. Take a look.
We're here with Betty Friedan for her interview. Ms. Friedan, over the past few years you've been very active politically. Could you tell the viewers some of your past accomplishments?
Of course. Yes, I'm most known for being the author of The Feminine Mystique, which I published in 1963. I also co-founded the National Organization for Women in 1966. I've fought for increased abortion rights and helped establish the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws. And I've also helped create the National Women's Political Caucus in '71.
When you co-founded the National Organization for Women, what were your hopes for it?
My goals, I had a couple. One was to end sex-classified employment notices. Another was greater representation of women in the government. Better child care centers for working mothers. Legalized abortion. And then various other government reforms.
And what is it like for your book to be such an inspiration for housewives everywhere?
Well, the thing you have to realize is it's not just housewives. Women have other roles in society. That was the goal of Feminine Mystique, was to highlight that. There are female doctors, there are female teachers, there are female lawyers, there are students. There are so many different roles of women. Can I get a working woman on the set, please? Do you have someone here who... No? Where are the women? Where are they?
Should I go down there? We'll be back right after this commercial.
The Beatles decade, 1964 to 1974.
I wanna hold your hand, Eleanor Rigby, with Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Imagine.
Together and on their own, the Beatles. For 10 years on Capitol and Apple Records and Tapes.
Hello and welcome back to CBT News. Here to talk about our weather is Weather Boy.
Thank you, Susan. Now to the weather. As you can see, coming from the north to the south, there is a feminist cold front, so unless you absolutely need to go out, I would stay indoors. Might want to put on your snow tires too, because from the east there is a hippie movement that is coming in too, and they got lots of drugs, so stay away from those drugs, kids. That's pretty much going to do it for the weather, so back to you, Susan.
Thank you, Weather Boy. Now to the time you have all been waiting for. A lot of issues arose following the Vietnam War, both during and before Nixon's presidency. Here to discuss and debate some of these issues is Mr. Herbert Whitaker, a history professor from Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, specializing in the history of war. And here to debate him is Vietnam War veteran and Vietnam Veterans Against the War activist, Marty Johnston. Thank you for joining us on CBT News, and welcome you too. Our first question has to do with the Gulf of Tonkin. On August 4th, 1967, 2 U.S. destroyers were believed to have been attacked by the North Vietnamese. But on December 6th, 1967, a letter from John White, a former naval officer, to a news station revealed that information received on the night of Gulf of Tonkin led him to believe that there was no such attack. How do you think the American people should feel after being told that there was no attack from the North Vietnam, Mr. Whitaker?
First off, I believe that the American people should place their trust in the government and the military rather than some naval officer who went against the U.S. in treasonous actions going straight to the press. And second, if there was an attack, the Vietnamese attacked us first, according to all reports. It was our job to defend ourselves, and I think that the Americans should believe that the military took the correct actions, and they should place their trust in the military.
And I believe that, everybody deserves to know what happened, and that, no one was injured, so there's no point for us to go and make the situation worse than it already is. And nobody was injured or killed, or there's even no evidence to say that they for sure definitely attacked us.
Thank you. It's interesting you say that, Mr. Whitaker, that we should put our trust in the government and our military, because the lying of the U.S. government continued through the reveal of the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times published their first excerpt on June 13, 1971, which informed the American people that we were most likely not going to win the war, and it was not in the effort to help Vietnam, but instead contain communist China. Do you believe that these are true, Mr. Whitaker?
While the containment of China may have been one of the main reasons behind America's involvement in Vietnam, this was not specifically to benefit the United States or to oppose China, but to benefit the entire world, including Vietnam. Furthermore, whether we like it or not, truthfulness is not always a part of the government. and this information might just be too difficult for the American people to handle.
Everybody deserves to know the truth, though, and I believe that the American citizens need at some point to grow up, and they need to be able to handle what people are experiencing over in Vietnam to better understand what those vets are really going through, and that way we can better come together as a society.
Not everyone can handle all the bloodshed that you have seen, Mr. Johnston. Unlike you, the general public is not familiar with such gruesome action and may not be able to comprehend these military tactics that play a much greater role over the entire world than what the American people have seen.
That's true, but it all starts with one step, and in order to truly come together, we need to start somewhere, and we need to start with the truth, and that is where we should start. Whether or not people can handle it, that is out of my control.
Thank you. Our next question has to do with Kent State shooting. On May 4th, 1970, 4 Kent State students died after shots fired from guns of the National Guard of Ohio during a Vietnam War protest. This became known as the Kent State Massacre. Mr. Johnston, do you think that the National Guard was justified in their actions?
No, I do not believe that they were justified in their actions. No one deserves to be shot or even killed, for that matter, for protesting for what they believe to be something that they don't feel is worthy of other people dying.
Mr. Whitaker?
Well, I believe that the National Guard's actions were not justified. If there had been violence, I believe that they should have taken action, maybe not through the use of guns, but the National Guard's role is to protect everyone, not just some people or some point of views. So I believe that their role in the protests was necessary, but I believe that their actions were not justified.
Thank you. Our next question is directed towards Mr. Johnston over a very controversial topic. A lot of social change throughout the Vietnam War can be shown through the Woodstock Music Festival that first took place in 1969. Mr. Johnston, would you be able to further elaborate on what it is like at the festival and the important role some of the artists play in social change?
I saw some fantastic singers at Woodstock. Janny J, Jim Hendrix, the Country Joe and the Fish, Richie Heavens, all the best. Some of the best music I've heard in a while. And, they're all so influential with their expressionism and how they're able to express their ideas through their music.
Aren't you a little worried about some of the concepts that some of these artists are trying to elaborate on through their music, such as drugs, sex before marriage, and being aggressive towards Vietnam War veterans?
I believe that in order to truly start change, that we must do what is necessary in order for people to take attention, and that is what these singers are doing through their music, and I believe that is the best thing that we can do at this time.
Mr. Whitaker, are you nervous about some of the negative impacts this music can have on future generations?
Absolutely. These young Americans look up to these figures, taking their advice, mimicking their actions, doing drugs, having sex before marriage. The revolution that these young traders are attempting to bring upon is changing the way that things in America have worked for years, and I don't see how that couldn't have a negative impact.
Thank you. All right, our final question has to do with Nixon's idea of Vietnamization. Vietnamization was an idea introduced by Nixon to slowly remove American troops from Vietnam and give South Vietnamese troops more control over the war effort against communist North Vietnam. Do you two believe that this concept was effective?
I'm not a fan. First off, men are dying. I saw many men give their lives for nothing, and now we're saying let's keep them dying. That's absolutely stupid. Get the men out and save lives. Nixon was just worried about his image, nothing else.
Vietnamization is a necessary strategy for the United States to remain a strong, reliable world power. If we were to immediately withdraw all of our troops, we would be seen as weak and unreliable. We can't, if we're not able to completely and utterly protect the freedom and pride of Vietnamese people, the least we can do is protect the freedom and pride of our own American soldiers who have sacrificed so much.
How important is pride, though, if men are dying?
That is a very good point, Mr. Johnston. But that is all the time we have for, so thank you two so much for joining us here at CBT News.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.